Evolved Zap, 40% usage rate. Evolved Bomber, 34% usage rate. Log, 22% usage rate. Evolved Bats, 21% usage rate. Out of the top 10 most used cards in Clash Royale in competitive play, 4 of them are 2 Elixir cards, and it's not just a one-time occurrence. If you look at any time in the game's entire history, we see that out of the cards with the highest usage in the game, a good chunk of them are 2 Elixir cards. But why exactly is this? What makes 2 Elixir cards in particular so good? In this video, I hope to observe how 2 Elixir cards shaped modern day Clash Royale, and what truly makes them so good. To prove my point of 2 Elixir cards being so meta-defining, I will briefly go through the involvement of 2 Elixir cards in the game's history. Starting way back in 2016, 2 Elixir cards were rampant throughout the meta. Zap was such a strong spell back in 2016 that it had a 98% usage rate in top ladder, the highest usage rate of any card in the game's entire history. Another 2 Elixir card, the Ice Golem, was a versatile card as well, being one of the longest lasting top 5 troops in the game. And how could I forget the Log, the first legendary spell in the game, which traded blows with the Zap as the most popular card in 2016. 2016 was a more beatdown oriented type of Clash Royale, with more expensive decks being popular, such as P.E.K.K.A. Double Prince during early 2016, Golem/Giant Beatdown, Elixir Collector, and even the most dominant meta of all time, Giant Poison, which were generally very expensive. The average cost of these decks all being around 4 to 4.5 Elixir. It's surprising that 2 Elixir cards were so popular. 2017 started off with Log and Zap boxing for which spell would be number 1, with both spells at around 50% usage rate. At this point, out of the top 10 cards in Clash Royale, an average of 4 of them were 2 Elixir cards. Most of the time, these were Log and Zap. Cards such as the Bats, Goblins, and Ice Golem had high usage rates throughout the year. The immense popularity of 2 Elixir cards can be explained by the meta that had been occurring throughout 2017. 2017 started with Elite Barbarians being overpowered, so Zap paired well with them, clearing out swarms. Rage, another 2 Elixir card, also paired well with the E-Barbs. Then, the beatdown meta following the Night Witch release allowed Zap to flourish due to its versatility in these decks, such as countering an Inferno Tower. Night Witch was already such a broken card in Clash Royale due to her bats, so when the bats were released as an actual troop, following a few buffs, they shot up in usage rate from 0% usage to 38.5% usage from August to September in 2017. And finally, second half of 2017 was entirely dominated by Log bait. It's no surprise that this resulted in high usage rate of the Log and Zap, which could clear goblins and goblin gangs and princesses. This is also the reason that goblins recorded a high usage rate in 2017. At the end of the year, Barb Barrel was released into the game, yet another modern day 2 Elixir card, since it wasn't always 2 Elixir. Once again, 2018 was a hectic year, with Logbait being dominant during the first half. P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam really started to pick up, and in late 2018, it would become a more popular archetype than Logbait. Cards like Log, Zap, and Bats were as popular as ever, and again, in the top 10 most used cards in top ladder, at least 4 2 Elixir cards maintained their position throughout the year, with the Barb Barrel being the new addition to this top 10 in late 2018, when its Elixir cost was reduced to 2 Elixir. In fact, if you look at every meta deck in 2018, it was guaranteed that one of the 3 2 Elixir spells would be used, either the Log, Barbarian Barrel, and Zap, and almost 30% of the time, you would see Bats in these decks. That's how popular 2 Elixir cards were. September 2018 card usage rate sums it up pretty well here. I'm pretty sure this was the exact reason Snowball was added to the game in 2018. It was Clash Royale's attempt to try and make Log and Zap less of a guaranteed pick in every deck, but didn't really work out in their favor, since Log and Zap were so strong, there was no reason to deviate. 2019 was once again a crazy year for 2 Elixir cards. Snowball finally found its place in the toxic lava clone meta that emerged at the start of 2019 due to the overpowered clone spell. And even after this, Snowball still remained dominant in the balloon cycle meta that would follow. Both Bats and Snowball were extremely popular at this time. Expo and P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam would also become extremely popular in late 2019. And for the first time probably in the game's entire history, both Log and Zap was absent from the top 10 cards, but Snowball and Barbarian Barrel were now the top cards. Even without Log and Zap, there was still around 4 to 5 2 Elixir cards in the top 10. The influence of 2 Elixir cards in Clash Royale was starting to become pretty insane, and in late 2019, the horrific Witch, Night Witch, and Elixir Golem meta would emerge, which I have made a video about already, but essentially, buffs to cards like the Night Witch and Witch, as well as the Wall Breakers, allowed them to torment the meta. The 2 Elixir Wall Breakers would shoot up in usage rate, and found themselves in the top 10 cards at the end of 2019. Early 2020 was pretty similar to late 2019, with Snowball and Bats being extremely popular 2 Elixir cards. The meta was overrun by minor Wallbreakers and Golem Night Witch, as well as Mega Knight Bats. It's kinda hard to describe the meta in 2020. It was all over the place. However, this did not interrupt the dominance of 2 Elixir cards, which once again maintained exceptional popularity. Again, throughout the year, 2 Elixir cards would make up at least 4 of the top 10 most popular cards. With the rising popularity of more fast-paced decks such as Lumberloon, it's no surprise that Snowball would maintain being a popular spell. 2020 was kind of the turning point in the game's history. We see this more in 2021. 2020 illustrates the shift from more beatdown related decks to cheaper cycled and faster paced decks. 2021 was a strange year for 2 Elixir cards. The average cost of decks was decreasing every year. Decks such as Hog 2.6 and Hog Quake were becoming extremely popular, as was Minor Poison and 3.0 Expo. It was actually kind of strange to see that 2 Elixir cards had started to become less popular. Of all the top decks, around only 1 or 2 of the 8 cards would be 2 Elixir cards. This was probably due to 1 Elixir and 3 Elixir cards becoming extremely popular, and with the release of the Goblin Drill, the meta would become extremely cheap cycle. What was cool to me was to see the shift from beatdown to cheap cycle in less than a year. With all the Swarm cards being so popular, Mother Witch became extremely popular. It was just amazing to see cards like the Barbarian Barrel, Log, and Zap maintain dominance, considering how popular Fireballies were becoming in the meta. While unrelated to 2 Elixir cards, Champions would be released in late 2021, which would give rise to the 3 card cycle, promoting cheap cycle once again. 2022 was dominated by cheap cycle once again, due to the 3 card cycle. Since the Archer Queen and Golden Knight were extremely strong, they began to become very popular within the meta, which would exemplify the strength of 2 Elixir cards within the game. Usage for Bats and Ice Golems slowly started dropping off, as they started to become less useful against more popular cards at the time. The Log, Barbarian Barrel, and Zap still maintained their position as strong 2 Elixir spells. The standout for me though, was what would happen in late 2022. The Monk and Phoenix were released, which promoted cheap cycle once again, since those cards were so strong that cycling them would overwhelm the opponent. This was an environment that 2 Elixir cards could benefit in, but then, a buff to Goblins would allow them to transform from a bottom 10 card to one of the best cards in the game. It seemed that 2 Elixir cards were making a comeback in the meta. 2 Elixir cards were dominant in the top 10 cards of the game again, as Goblins became the card with the highest win rate in October 2022. And just to end the year on a high, Clash Royale decided to buff the Mighty Miner so it became extremely broken, which saw the rise of Logbait to end 2022. 2 Elixir cards kind of maintained their popularity compared to 2021, but 2023 would change 2 Elixir cards forever. 2023's meta saw the Phoenix being dominant earlier in the year. Goblins were also extremely popular due to that buff that made them a top 10 card. 2023 was the first time that Clash Royale added new development to cards, evolutions, and it was evolutions that would completely change 2 Elixir cards forever. The first evolution to a 2 Elixir card was the Bats in October 2022. Bats were already a strong card, being a top 25 card easily, so the fact that they were allowed to become evolved transformed them from being a top 25 card to once again a top 15 card in Clash Royale, as they did years ago. Even though the evolved Bats were extremely underwhelming for players, they were still really strong. They were basically a minion horde for 2 Elixir, and the reason it was so underwhelming was because the evolutions released before it were absolutely insane. Think about it. Night Evolution at release was broken, and the Royal Recruits evolution was also broken. Both of these cards were released before the Bats, so it makes sense that people thought the Bats were bad, because the 2 previous evolutions were that strong. But buffs to the Bats made it more viable in competitive play. In late 2023, Clash Royale experimented with 2 evolution slots in the global tournament, and it was a success. 2023 was a great year for 2 Elixir cards, who had maintained a high usage rate throughout the year. With the addition of 2 evolution slots to regular gameplay, evolutions have become a fundamental aspect of the game in 2024, and of the 5 evolutions released so far this year, 3 of them have been 2 Elixir cards, the Bomber, Zap, and Wallbreakers. What surprises me is that Clash Royale knows 2 Elixir cards are strong, but they still evolve them, as if they want to make the game even more broken. The Evolved Bomber was the first of these to be released, and it was absolutely insane. The fact that it was 1 cycle and had a range of 11 tiles with its bomb on day 1 made it a magic archer for 2 Elixir, and before being released, it was rumored to survive arrows, although this was changed before public release. Imagine a 2 Elixir card being able to survive arrows, but it gets even crazier. Evolved Warbreakers were released shortly after that, and they were even more broken. They had 2 phases, and if you didn't defend them, they could do over 1200 damage to your tower, which is insane for a 2 Elixir card. And before release, they were planned to deal fireball levels of damage to nearby troops, so they could have been used defensively as well. But for me, the most broken evolution released so far is the Evolved Zap. It is basically the same as a normal zap, but it has 3 zaps that covers an increasingly large radius. It could kill fireballies and deal similar damage to spells that are much more expensive than it. So how do these 2 Elixir evolutions fare in competitive play? In short, they're absolutely meta-defining. Evolved Zap sits at a 40% usage rate in competitive play, and the Evolved Bomber, even after its range nerf, sits at a 34% usage rate. Evolved Bat sits at a 21% usage rate, and the Evolved Warbreakers sat at around a 14% usage rate when they were released. If we look at the most popular decks in competitive play, we see that there is at least one 2 Elixir evolution card. What makes it even crazier is that the popularity of other 2 Elixir cards has still maintained, so 2 Elixir cards are as popular as they've ever been. I've never seen 3 2 Elixir cards in the same deck before, but 2024's meta has truly been hectic. So what makes 2 Elixir cards in particular so good? There are multiple factors that make a card good in Clash Royale. Some basic ones include ease of upgradability, versatility, and skill cap. I believe that 2 Elixir cards fit this criteria perfectly. Take the example of the Rage spell in mid to late 2023. I didn't mention this in the history of 2 Elixir cards, but the Rage spell was becoming extremely popular due to the strength of the Goblin Giant. This was because if the Goblin Giant's spear goblins locked on the tower, Rage could allow them to get so much damage while the Goblin Giant damaged the tower or a defensive building. This made the Rage quite a low skill card, since all you needed to do was observe if the goblins had locked on the tower and place Rage, and was very versatile due to the fact that it could kill swarm cards like the skeletons and Rage other support cards, including what was very popular at the time, the Evolved Knight. But if that's the only thing that makes 2 Elixir cards strong, then it doesn't explain why cards like Bats were so strong in the early days of Clash Royale. That brings me on to my next point about 2 Elixir cards. In general, 2 Elixir cards have always had insane defensive capabilities. I mean, look at the Barbarian Barrel. It's designed to be purely used on defense, and it is a really good defensive card. The amount of value cards like the Bats and Barbarian Barrel can get on defense is the reason they have always been popular throughout the game's history. The point of Bats is to kill ground tanks quickly, such as a P.E.K.K.A. or a Valkyrie. Since tanks cost more than 2 Elixir, Bats are an easy positive Elixir trade, and paired with an Ice Spirit or another tank like the Miner or Mega Knight, Bats are deadly on offense. Barbarian Barrel is a good counter to swarm cards. The Barbarian that spawns allows it to distract troops that are paired with the swarm cards. A good example of this is the interaction between the Barbarian Barrel and the Witch. It takes out the skeletons and attacks the Witch directly, providing a positive 3 Elixir trade. This is also the case with the Wizard. The Barbarian Barrel can take it out completely, providing another positive Elixir trade. It has the defensive capabilities of 2 Elixir cards that makes them so strong. And compared with 1 Elixir cards, 2 Elixir cards can provide so much more value on defense. We see this once again with skeletons and bats. For only 1 more Elixir, you have the potential to counter so many more cards. It doesn't just stop there though. Another factor that contributes to versatility is simply the cheap cost. In my opinion, 2 Elixir is the perfect cost of a good card. Let me explain. A versatile card is one that can be used in many situations and fits into a lot of decks. 2 Elixir cards are the perfect cost that provides the compromise between cheap cost and strength. They aren't too strong, but that's not an issue, since they are so cheap that they almost always provide value. This is what makes 2 Elixir cards so versatile. And compared to 1 Elixir cards, which are almost all too cheap to provide value, and 3 Elixir cards which are more offensive cards than 2 Elixir cards, there's really no disadvantage to using 2 Elixir cards in any deck. It reminds me of the differences in usage between the Bats and the Minions in 2017. The Bats had completely taken over the meta in late 2017, so they overshadowed the Minions at the time. Minions did fill a similar role to the Bats. The Bats were a much higher skill card. This is probably the reason that Bats were less used by lower ladder players compared to the Minions in 2017. I also believe that since most 2 Elixir cards are spells, it contributes to its immense popularity. Spells are the backbone of almost every deck in Clash Royale. You almost always need spells to take out large swarms of troops, or even get value with multiple cards that would otherwise be out of reach, such as an Elixir collector placed behind the Princess Tower. Spells like the Zap and Log fulfill different purposes, but have always shared the podium as the best spells in the game, simply due to their versatility in different decks. The Zap can be used to reset buildings such as the Inferno Tower and kill air swarm troops such as minions and bats. The Log can be used to reset ground troops and roll in a single lane, so it can deal damage to multiple troops in a straight line, rather than within a range like the Zap. Some spells in Clash Royale are also much higher skill than others, such as the Snowball. The unique use of the Snowball is to slow down and knock back troops, which can be applied to a variety of different decks. We saw this in 2019, where Snowball was extremely popular due to the popularity of faster cycle decks. The best of the best players loved using Snowball instead of Log due to its greater versatility if used correctly on quicker moving troops, such as the Lumberjack or the Balloon. However, the biggest contributor to why 2 Elixir cards are so good is evolutions. With new evolutions being released so often, and even more ways to integrate evolutions into Clash Royale, evolutions are literally changing the way Clash Royale is played, and with 2 Elixir cards making up a significant amount of evolutions in Clash Royale, it makes it even more popular. The entire concept of evolutions is to cycle them faster to get to a stronger version of an existing card with a unique ability. 2 Elixir cards incentivizes the use of evolutions, because even without evolutions, 2 Elixir cards are extremely strong, so you can use your 2 Elixir card normally, and when you get to the evolved version, you have the chance to develop a really good push on your opponent. And every 2 Elixir evolution that has been released so far fills different roles, so 2 Elixir evolutions are extremely versatile. Evolved Bats fill the defensive role and even provide deadly counter push potential. Evolved Bomber acts as sort of a defensive card that can punish the opponent offensively in the same way that a Magic Archer can. Evolved Warbreakers are a deadly offensive unit that can deal thousands of damage if the opponent is caught off guard, and the Evolved Zap is an even stronger version of one of the strongest spells in the game. Evolved 2 Elixir cards are absolutely broken in my opinion. It shouldn't be the case that an already strong tier of cards is made to be even stronger due to evolutions. It was already known that 2 Elixir cards are strong. Evolutions made these decks with 2 Elixir cards even stronger. It almost feels like Supercell intentionally made an aspect of the game that was already strong, just to taunt the player base. Just to add to how broken evolutions are, it doesn't help that most 2 Elixir evolutions are lower rarity cards. In fact, it is probably one of the biggest reasons that 2 Elixir cards have been so popular throughout the game's history. Cards like Bats, Snowball, and Zap are all common cards, meaning they've been easier to level up than cards such as Lightning or Fireball in the earlier days of Clash Royale. Evolutions takes this a step further, because the cards that are easier to upgrade have been given evolutions, and levels do matter, especially for 2 Elixir cards that have lower health. The interaction changes that come with high levels on Bats or the Bomber is kind of insane. Overall, I think that the reason 2 Elixir cards have always been popular in Clash Royale comes down to versatility overall. 2 Elixir cards have always been easy to integrate in multiple decks due to the low chance of being seriously punished by them. They get positive elixir trades so often that the negative elixir trades that emerge from using them are heavily outweighed. I hope you did enjoy this video though. Thanks for watching.